I signed a contract to pretend to be engaged to the woman I had been quietly in love with for 9 years, and I did not find out until the night of the Harvest Gala that she had written the contract for exactly the same reason. I was 24, and Omega, the assistant cellar-keeper of Domaine Castellane, and the woman whose name was on the other line of that contract. The woman who 4 months later would put her mouth to the gland at the joint of my neck in front of 300 people and make a bond that no lawyer in the country could undo, was Verity Castellane. She was 32. She was an alpha.
Welcome, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
She was the sole heir of the oldest winehouse in the valley, 400 hectares of vines that had carried the same name on the cellar doors for 200 years. And the people who worked her land called her the Frost of Castellane, the way you name a thing about weather, because she ran the whole of it, the vines and the debt and the 90 families who depended on the harvest, from behind a face that gave away nothing at all. And she wore her grandmother's heavy gold signet on the smallest finger of her right hand, and never, that any living soul had seen, took it off. I had spoken perhaps 200 sentences to her in 9 years. 198 of them had been about wine, the malolactic on the East Block, the cork taint in the 19, whether to pick them or low before the rain. 2 of them had been the 2 I said the night her grandmother died, when Verity came down into the deep cellar at 3 in the morning, because she could not be upstairs with the doctors any longer, and found me there because I could not be anywhere else, and asked me a question that was not about wine, and I answered it honestly. The way you answer honestly when the only other person awake in the whole sleeping world is grieving the only human being who ever protected her. And you would sooner cut out your own tongue than lie to her. I'm going to tell you about the night the entire Harvest Gala went silent. 300 guests, the whole valley, the rival house of Aubrac, and the gray board that wanted her sold like a parcel of land, to watch Verity Castellane take off her grandmother's ring and put her bare hand on a cellar girl's neck and burn down the most important alliance in the valley's history on purpose, in public, with everyone she had ever been raised to impress looking on. But I have to go back first, because the ring coming off is not the part that mattered. The mattering had already happened 9 years before, in a deep, cold cellar that smelled of oak and stone and old wine and grief. And I had spent every one of those 9 years telling myself I had imagined it, the way you tell yourself a thing you cannot afford to have been real. If you want the uncensored, too warm for YouTube version of this story, the parts I cannot tell here, the things said in the dark with the ring off, it is on my Patreon link in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. Let me go back to the beginning of me, because the beginning of me is the only thing that explains why a grown woman would sign a contract to be loved on paper by the one person she actually loved and call it a sensible financial decision and mean it. I was born in the workers' cottages at the bottom of the Castellane land, the daughter of a cellar hand and a woman who picked grapes 9 months pregnant, and went back to the rows 3 days after I was born because the rows do not wait, and neither does rent. We had the smell of fermentation in our clothes from the day we were born to the day we left. Valley people can tell a vineyard child by the way she breathes near an open vat, the way she leans in instead of back. My father was the gentlest man the estate ever employed, and the proudest, and the 2 things are the same thing, really. And when I was 16, he had a stroke in the middle of the autumn pressing. Too young, the doctor said, the way they say it when they mean this is your life now, the both of you. And it took the use of his right side and most of his speech. And it took, worse than either, the one thing he had built his whole self on, which was being the one who carried other people instead of the one carried. My mother had already gone by then. Not dead. Gone. The way tired women in hard places sometimes simply put down the basket one ordinary morning and walk out to the road and do not come back. And you spend a year listening for the gate, and then you stop. So at 16, I became the thing I have been every day since, which is the one who holds it together, the roof over one proud ruined man. And I taught myself not to grieve where he could see it, because his shame at needing me was already more than he could lift. And if I had added my grief to his shame, it would have buried us both. Let me tell you how I learned to be small, because you cannot understand the contract without it. And Omega alone in a great estate full of alphas caring for a man who cannot defend her, learns very fast that being noticed is the beginning of being taken. That the cellar master's nephew who lingers, the buyer who offers to help with your father's situation, the foreman who finds reasons to send the other girls home first are all the same weather. And that the only umbrella a girl like me can afford is invisibility. So I drank the suppressant tea the old cellar women brewed from wormwood and vervain, the bitter stuff that flattens an omega's scent to almost nothing. Not for the cellar's sake, but for my father's, so that I would read to the men of the valley as furniture and not as prey. I wore my hair scraped back and my coat a size too big. I made myself a pallet attached to as little woman as I could manage. And for 8 years it worked. And I kept my father in his own bed in his own cottage, with his own view of the rose he had given his back to. And I paid for it every single month with a wage I earned by being the most gifted taster in the cellar and the most invisible woman in the valley. And I told no one, ever, that the two things were killing me by halves. Let me tell you about my father directly, because he is the reason I never once let myself want a thing for myself. And the keeping small was not weakness. It was the most load-bearing structure in two people's lives. And you have to feel its weight to understand why I could not, for 9 years, let myself reach for the one thing I wanted. After the stroke, he could not do up his own buttons or say my name without it coming out broken and sideways, Maren in 2 tries. And he wept the first time I had to shave him. The silent, terrible weeping of a man who spent 40 years being strong and is now being tended by the child he was supposed to tend. And the one gift I could give him, the only one, was a life that looked from the inside, like nothing had been lost, like he was still the father and I was still the girl, and the world was still right side up. So I never complained where he could hear it. I never let him see me come home gray with exhaustion. I never, in 8 years, let him learn that I had wanted things, a life of my own, a love, a single hour that belonged to nobody but me, and had set every one of them down so quietly he never heard them land. Because if he had known the cost, he would have refused to let me pay it. And a proud man who refuses to be cared for, when caring for him is the only roof there is, dies of it. So I lied to him with my whole life, kindly, for 8 years, and I kept him warm and seen and home. And I want to be clear that I would do it again, all of it, exactly the same. And that when Verity Castellane said to me much later, in the dark, with her grandmother's ring off, "You have spent your whole life making yourself small enough to fit inside what other people need, and I have spent mine making myself hard enough to never need anyone. We are the same coward in 2 different coats." She was right, but only half right. The smallness was not only a cage, it was a roof. It kept the rain off a man who had carried me first. The trouble with becoming a roof is that you forget, after a while, that you were ever supposed to be a person who could stand up underneath one. I should tell you when it started, the loving her, because I have said it took 9 years and you deserve to know that is not a figure of speech. I was 15. The autumn before my father's stroke, and I had been sent up to the great house cellar to carry down a case the younger boys could not be trusted with. And I came around the end of a barrel row in the lamplight and found the heir of Castellane alone. She was 23 then, not yet the frost of anything, her sleeves pushed up and her grandmother's ring catching the light, and she was doing a thing I have never until this night told a living soul I saw. She had her forehead pressed to the cold curve of a barrel, and her eyes shut, just for a moment, just breathing, the way you breathe when you have been holding something up for a very long time, and have stolen 1 minute alone to feel exactly how heavy it is. She did not know I was there. I backed away down the row before she could find out. I had seen it, the hairline crack in the marble, the tired girl inside the air. And something in a 15-year-old who had already begun learning to hold up her own roof recognized it, the way you recognize your own face in a dark window at night, suddenly and with a small shock. And that was it. That was the whole of it. That was the first hour of 9 years. I never told her. What would a cellar girl say? But I want you to understand that I never once In all the 9 years after, looked at the frost of Castellane and actually saw frost. I saw the girl with her forehead on the barrel, stealing a minute to feel the weight, and I loved her the helpless way you love the thing you were never supposed to see. I was good at the work. I will say it plainly, because the quiet ones never say it, and someone should. I was very good. I had the thing they cannot teach, the thing old Honora Castellane called the cellar's memory. I could taste a wine blind and tell you the block it came from, and the year it rained in August, and whether the woman who pruned that row had been gentle or in a hurry. I could find the one barrel out of 1,000 that had begun very quietly to turn. I knew the deep cellar in the dark by the breathing of the oak, the way you know a sleeping house by its sounds. I kept the tasting ledgers in my own hand, because mine was the only palate the old matriarch fully trusted, and Honora Castellane trusted almost no one alive, which is the part of the story you have to understand next, because Honora is the only reason a cellar girl and the heir of the house were ever, even once, in the same dark room. Honora Castellane was the matriarch, and she was the only Castellane in 200 years who ever looked at me and saw a person where a wage was standing. She had run the domain for 50 years, since before her husband was cold. A tiny, upright, terrifying woman who could silence a board meeting by setting down her glass a half-inch too hard, who had buried 2 husbands and a son, and most of her own century, and had not, that anyone could remember, ever once asked for help. In my 19th year, she came down into the cellar on her stick to taste the new vintage, and found a cellar girl muttering corrections at the head blender under her breath. And instead of having me dismissed for impudence, she stopped and turned her one good eye on me, and made me taste 40 barrels in a row in front of the whole crew. And at the end of it, she said to the room, in the dry voice that had ruled the valley for half a century, "The girl's palate is worth more than all of yours stacked end to end." And from that day, she kept me near her. She taught me the things she had given up trying to teach her own blood. Not the chemistry, which anyone can learn, but the history under the history, which families had betrayed which across 3 centuries, where the debts and the bodies and the bastards were buried. Why the Aubracs could never be trusted, no matter how sweetly they smiled across the valley. And I came to understand slowly the strangest thing about the powerful, which is how completely alone they are, that Honora had outlived every single person who had known her as a girl, that she was the last living rememberer of her own life, and that she had decided, in the unsentimental way of the very old, to be truly known one last time before she went, and to be known by me, precisely because I was no one, because a cellar girl with a dying father and no friends in the valley could be trusted with everything for the simple reason that she had no one on earth to tell. And Honora had a granddaughter, the heir, Verity, whom the old woman had raised herself after Verity's parents went off a winter road when the child was 11. That particular emptying out that happens to a child who is handed a phone and a future in the same hour, and whom Honora had raised the only way she knew, which was the way she herself had been raised. Built rather than loved, drilled rather than held, made into a vessel strong enough to carry a 200-year-old name without ever once being asked whether she wanted to. I want to tell you what Verity was, because the frost of Castellane makes her sound cold, and she was not cold. She was contained, the way a cellar is contained, the way enormous pressure is contained, dark and still, and holding something far larger than itself very, very carefully so that none of it spills and breaks. Her scent was cold stone and black fruit, and underneath, something like wood smoke. I knew that before I knew one other true thing about her, the way the whole estate knew it. Because she walked the cellars at first light before the crews came in, alone, running her bare hand along the barrels the way her grandmother had taught her small hands to do. And the gold signet caught the lamp, and the cold air seemed to draw itself up and pay attention when she passed, and the cellar women would go quiet and find something to do with their hands. I had spent 9 years being a shape that the heir of Castellane walked past in the dark without seeing. And then, on the worst night of her life, for the length of one conversation, she stopped walking past. Honora died slowly, over a long gray winter, in the great bedroom at the top of the house, and the whole estate held its breath for 3 months while she did it. Because we all knew, every cellar hand and picker and bookkeeper knew, that when the old woman's will went out of the domain, the things she had held at bay by sheer ferocity for 50 years were going to come in all at once. On the last night, I could not bear to be in the great house where it was happening, and I could not bear to be home in the cottage where I could do nothing. And so I did the only thing left to a person who loves someone. She is not allowed to sit beside while they die. I went down into the deepest cellar, the old library cellar where Honora kept the bottles from the years that had mattered to her. Her wedding year, her husband's last vintage, the year her son was born and the year he died, the year Verity came squalling into the world. And I sat down among them on the cold stone in the dark, because those sleeping bottles were the nearest thing to her that a girl like me was permitted to touch. And I kept her company the only way I had. And at 3 a.m, the heavy door at the top of the steps opened, and Verity Castellane came down in her shirt sleeves with her grandmother's death on her face, undone in a way I had never seen the frost of Castellane undone, and would not see again for 9 years. And she found me sitting there in the lamplight among the bottles. And neither of us said the obvious thing. What are you doing down here? Because we both already knew the answer, and it was the same answer. There was nowhere else on the whole estate for either of us to be. She sat down on a wine case across from me. We did not speak for a long time. The cellar ticked and breathed around us the way it does. And then she said the thing, the first not wine thing she had ever said to me in 9 years. She said, in a voice scraped down to nothing, "You knew her better at the end than I did. She talked to you." "I know she did. She told me your palate was the only honest thing left in this house. So tell me one true thing she said about me. Not a kind thing. I have had a great many kind things tonight, and I cannot survive one more." And I was past exhaustion, past the careful place where the cellar girl lived, out in the scoured clean country on the far side of grief, where you cannot manage a lie even to save yourself. And so I told her the truth, which was the worst thing and the best thing at once. I said, "She told me you were the only person she ever met who was as frightened as she was, and twice as good at hiding it." And I watched it land on Verity Castellane like a slow blow, and I watched her, for once, not look away from a true thing, and her eyes filled and did not spill. She held even that carefully, and I understood. In that lamplit cellar, with a dying woman's wedding wine breathing on the racks all around us, that I had just said the truest sentence anyone had ever said to her in her life, and that whatever else happened to either of us, she would never, ever forget that it was the cellar girl who said it. Honora died at dawn, while the light came gray over the rose she had spent 50 years defending. And 3 days later, at the funeral, in the cold chapel with the whole valley packed into the pews, Verity stood up to give the eulogy, and could not. She stood at the front in her black with 200 people watching the frost of Castellane open her mouth and make no sound, the silence stretching past bearing, the board shifting in their seats. And her eyes came up off her notes and went, over all those heads, to the very back, to the place by the door where the workers stood, because the workers always stand at the back, and they found me. And I did the only thing I could do for her from that distance, which was the thing I had learned to do for frightened horses and frightened fathers. I held still, and I held her gaze, and I did not look away, and I let her borrow whatever steadiness I had until she could find her own. And she breathed, and she found her voice, and she buried her grandmother properly in front of the whole valley. And not one soul in that chapel ever knew that the heir of Castellane got through the hardest 2 minutes of her life on a cellar girl's eyes. I told myself afterward that I had imagined how long she'd looked, that it had been a half second and grief had stretched it. I told myself that for 9 more months. That is how long it took the wolves to come. Honora had held the domain together with nothing but her own will, And when the will went into the ground, the gap it left filled the way a hole in a riverbank fills, all at once, with everything the bank had been holding back. The debt she had carried quietly for a decade and never let the valley smell, the board she had cowed for 50 years, and that no one now could cow, and, circling, patient, 3 generations patient, the house of Aubrac. The Aubracs owned the valley's other great name, and, more to the point, most of its bank, and they had wanted Castellane for 100 years, and Honora's death handed them at last the road in that her ferocity had always blocked. Not a purchase. The Castellane pride would not have survived being bought, and the board knew it. A marriage of the 2 houses. Verity Castellane bonded to Coralie Aubrac, the vineyards merged, the old debt swallowed whole. The century of feud ended in a single beautiful gala with the entire valley as witness, and the Aubracs holding the deed to everything by morning. And the board, which cared about the numbers on the page and not at all about the woman whose life was one of them, had voted for it. They had set the date. They had begun, in the way of boards, to refer to the heir zone bonding as the Aubrac matter, a thing to be resolved, a line item nearing closure. I knew all of this long before Verity knew that I knew it, because I was invisible, because I was the cellar girl who kept the ledgers and poured the wine at the board lunches, and the powerful talk in front of a pouring servant, exactly the way they talk in front of a chair. And I stood at the sideboard with the decanter in my hand and listened to a room full of gray people in good suits decide to spend a living woman like a parcel of the Western blocks. And I poured, and I kept my face still, and I said nothing, because that is what a chair does. And I had been a chair for 9 years, and I did not yet know that I was about to stop. And then, on a wet night in the deep cellar, the heir came down the stone steps a second time, 9 months almost to the day after the first. This time her face was not undone. This time it was set in the particular way a face sets, when its owner has decided to do a thing she is ashamed of and has run out of any other road. She had a leather folder under her arm. She sat down on the same wine case where she had sat the night her grandmother died. And she said it without preamble, in the contained, flat voice that gave nothing away, the voice she used for the board and the buyers and the whole world she did not trust. I need to be unavailable to be bonded to Coralie Aubrac. There is one clause in the charter my grandmother wrote that the board cannot vote around. A Castellane heir who is already bonded cannot be entered into a merger marriage. It is the only protection she left me, and she left it on purpose. I understand that now. But it is useless to me, because to use it I would have to already have a person, and I have never had a person. I was not built with the room for one. You of all people know what this family does instead of loving its children. I have, however, for 9 years, had exactly one human being on this estate whom I would trust with my life and my grandmother's name in the same breath, and she is sitting in front of me, and I happen to know she is drowning under what her father's care costs and what her wage will never cover. So I am going to ask you the most shameful thing I have ever asked anyone. I am asking you to let me pretend to be engaged to you, Maren. A contract, a wage, a real one, a life-changing one, a fixed ending. I want you to understand what it does to a person to be told by the one human being she has loved in silence for 9 years that they would like to pretend to love her, for money as a legal maneuver, to use her body as an instrument of charter law, and to feel her own stupid traitor heart leap anyway. Leap at the word pretend, because even the counterfeit was more than she had ever in her life let herself hope to be handed. I said yes before I had finished hating myself for how much I wanted to. I told her it was for my father, and I let her believe that was the whole of it, because the whole of it was a thing I would have gone to my grave before letting her see. But I promised you, at the start of this, that I would tell it honestly, and the honest thing is this. I would have signed that contract if it had paid me nothing at all. I would have signed it to be near her under any name, in any lie, on any terms. That is what 9 years of wanting someone you are not allowed to want will do to you. It will make you grateful for a forgery of the thing. and call the gratitude good sense. We had rules, and she wrote them into the contract in her own hand. And the rules tell you everything about Verity Castellane, that she would have died before saying aloud. No touching that we had not both agreed to beforehand, and even then only for the look of the thing, in front of witnesses. Separate rooms in the great house where I was to move for the year so the lie would hold up to the staff. A year exactly. Then a quiet dissolution, an irreproachable reference, and a sum of money that would put a ramp in my father's cottage, and a nurse in 3 afternoons a week, and, for the first time in my life, a small folded future in my own pocket that belonged to no one but me. And one rule that I did not understand the night I read it, and would not understand for 4 months, the rule she slipped in among the practical ones as though it were just as practical as the rest. In private, the performance stops entirely. When no one is watching, we owe each other nothing. You are not to perform affection for me behind closed doors. Not warmth, not tenderness, not the small kindnesses. I thought, reading it in the lamplight, that she was sparing herself the awkwardness of a woman she was paying being sweet to her in private. I know now it was the opposite of that. She was protecting herself from hope. She could not have borne to receive tenderness from me behind a closed door, and have to wonder, every single time, whether any of it was real or whether I was only being good at my job. And Verity Castellane would rather have nothing real, clean, and certain and cold than something warm she could not trust the provenance of. She had built her entire self on that principle, brick by brick, since she was 11 years old. And it is the most Verity thing about this whole story, and it is the thing that very nearly cost us everything we had. So we performed. And here is what the contract did not foresee, could not have foreseen, because the woman who wrote it did not know her own heart any better than she trusted mine. The performance was the easiest thing either of us had ever done in our lives, because for me, it was not a performance at all. And for her, though I did not learn this until the gala, it was not a performance either. We were 2 people pretending to feel the exact thing we both actually felt, and calling it acting, and getting paid for it. I want to tell you the shape of those 4 months, because the gala is where it ends, but the gala is not where it lived. It lived in the small, ordinary hours, and a love like ours, that took 9 years to come up for air, deserves to be told in the small hours, and not just the loud one. In public, she learned how I take my coffee. Black, scalding, no sugar, the way cellar people drink it before dawn. And there began every morning to be a cup of it waiting at my place. And when I looked at her, she would say, before I could thank her, "Don't read into it, it's for the arrangement," and go back to her papers. In public, she would set her hand at the small of my back to steer me through a crowded room, and I would feel the warmth of it printed there for an hour after she had taken it away. And I learned not to lean back into it, which was the hardest small discipline of my life. The coffee was for the arrangement. The hand was for the arrangement. The dawn in the cellar. The way she'd started asking after my father by name. The evening she sent her own car and driver, an hour each way to take me home through a storm. All of it for the arrangement. She said it so many times that it stopped being a sentence and became a wall, a thing she rebuilt by hand around every tender act the instant after she'd committed it. And I learned to live on the warmth and step around the wall. And I told myself, lying awake in the separate room down the long, cold corridor from hers, that a person does not build a wall that fast, that often, that desperately, around a thing that is not trying with all its strength to get out. I want to tell you about one night in particular, because the months otherwise blur together into coffee and dawns and the refrain. And there was one night that did not blur, one night I have kept whole. It was late in the 3rd month, the night of the first hard frost, and a frost like that is a catastrophe on a wine estate. It can take a whole block of late fruit in a single hour, and the alarm went up near midnight, and the entire estate poured out into the freezing rows with smudge pots and burners, and the particular controlled panic of people whose year is dying in front of them. The heir came out in her grandmother's old field coat and worked the rows like a hand, like anyone, and I worked beside her in the black cold for 4 hours, saving the last of the Cabernet, the two of us and 90 other people breathing smoke and frost. And somewhere in the worst of it, reaching past me to light a pot that had guttered, she put her bare hand flat over mine on the cold steel for balance, and neither of us moved it. There was no one near enough to perform for. We both knew there wasn't. And we left our hands there 1 second, 2, 3, in the smoke and the killing cold, far longer than balance could ever have explained. And then the wind shifted the heat, and the moment broke, and we went back to saving the fruit, and did not speak of it. But at dawn, when the block was saved and the estate stood gray and wrung out in the thinning smoke, she brought me a coffee from the flask in her coat, and she did not say it was for the arrangement. She stood beside me and watched the sun come up over the rows we had kept alive together with our own hands. And after a long while, she said, in a voice I had never once heard her use, "My grandmother saved this exact block in a frost the year my mother was born." And that was all. That was the whole of it. But I lay awake the entire next day with my cold hand pressed to my own cheek where her warm one had been, and I understood that the wall was not going to hold, that the thing behind it was stronger than she was, and I was so frightened of being right about it that I said nothing at all for 1 more month, until the gala said it for the both of us. And there was the ring. I had never in 9 years seen Verity Castellane's hand without her grandmother's heavy gold signet on the smallest finger. The cellar women said she'd worn it since the funeral. The older ones said Honora had worn it for 50 years before that it was the seal of the house, that it had pressed the wax on 2 centuries of Castellane contracts. And in the 4th week of the arrangement, on a late night in her study with the gala seating chart spread between us and no one in the world watching, and the performance therefore officially off, she took it off. She turned the gold slowly off her finger and set it on the desk between us and rubbed the pale band it left, absently, the way you rub a wrist that's worn a watch too long, and went on talking about which Aubrac cousin could not be seated near which board member. And I understood, the way you understand a thing in your body before your mind has the words, that the ring coming off meant the heir had left the room and only the woman had stayed. That for as long as that gold lay on the desk, she was not the frost of Castellane holding 200 careful years, so they would not shatter. She was a 32-year-old who had been built instead of held, and was so tired, so unspeakably tired, of holding still. We did not touch on those nights. The contract forbade it, and so did she. And so, in the end, did I, because I had decided, somewhere in the 2nd month, that I would not be the one to make a real thing out of something she had paid for. That if it ever became real, it would not be because the cellar girl took advantage of the lonely air in the dark. That I would rather ache across a desk for a year than ever give her cause to wonder whether she'd bought my heart along with my time. So we sat on either side of her grandmother's desk with the ring between us like a small gold border. And she talked to me with it off the way she had talked to me exactly once before, in a cellar, the night Honora died. And I lived on the inside of that lie, like a woman living in a house she knows is going to be sold, loving every room of it more for knowing it cannot last. She took the ring off more and more as the weeks went on. By the last month, she took it off the moment the study door closed. I have never been so happy and so quietly broken at the same time. And I did not know, could not let myself even imagine, that across that desk, every night, with her grandmother's ring lying between us, Verity Castellane was just as happy and just as broken and just as certain that the wanting was hers alone to carry. There was a night, my father, forgive me, I tell this part badly because it undoes me. There was a night Verity insisted on driving me home herself. No driver, because the roads had iced, and she came in to carry the firewood my father could no longer carry. And she sat with him for an hour and drank the terrible homemade wine he still pressed in his good seasons from a single row he was allowed to keep. And she drank all of it, every drop of the worst wine in the valley, and asked him grave technical questions about it as though he were still the cellar hand he had been, and made his ruined face do the thing it had not done since the stroke, which was to forget for 1 hour that anything had been lost. And in the car afterward, in the dark, I could not say thank you because if I had opened my mouth, I would have wept, and she did not make me say it. She just said, looking at the road, "He was good at his work, your father." And I looked out my own window so she would not see my face. And I thought, "No, it is not. You terrible, frightened, beloved liar. No, it is not." The Harvest Gala is the night the whole valley comes up to Castellane. 300 people under strings of light in the great courtyard among the old vats and the plane trees. The one night a year, the estate opens its gates and shows the valley its face. And that year, it was meant to be the night the engagement was announced and the Aubrac threat was buried for good. A Castellane heir publicly, irreproachably, charter-bindingly promised. The merger marriage made impossible by a single sentence spoken in front of 300 witnesses. The domain saved by a beautiful, harmless, well-paid lie. And it would have worked. I believe to this day it would have worked perfectly if the House of Aubrac had been willing to lose quietly. But the House of Aubrac has not lost quietly one single time in 300 years. And I should have remembered that. Because Honora had taught me that very fact in this very cellar. And I had written it in the history under the history in my own hand. Coralie Aubrac came to the gala. Of course she came. And Aubrac does not miss the chance to watch a rival's triumph up close, the better to find the seam in it. And halfway through the evening, with the light strung gold between the old trees and the whole valley loose and warm with the new vintage, she did the thing the Aubracs do. The thing Honora would have seen coming a full week out, and that Verity, who is brilliant about everything in the world except the single possibility that she herself might be loved, did not see coming at all. Coralie stood up, with a glass in her hand and a measured smile, and the gray board arranged at the tables behind her like a jury already half persuaded, and she made a toast that was a blade with a ribbon tied round it. She congratulated the happy couple. She congratulated dear Verity on her practical solution to a charter difficulty. And she let the word practical sit in the warm air a beat too long, so that the smarter guests began to lean in. Someone had talked, a clerk in the lawyer's office, a junior on the board. It has never mattered who, the Aubracs buy seams for a living. And the courtyard went silent, 300 people and the whole valley and the gray jury of the board, silent under the gold lights. And I stood there at the heir's side in the borrowed dress with my entire counterfeit life coming to pieces in public. And I understood exactly what it meant, that they would void the engagement as the sham it provably signedly was, that the merger would go through after all, that I would be forever in the valley's mouth, the cellar girl who had been paid to humiliate the great house and would never pour a glass in this valley again. And so I did the thing that 16 years of holding it together and 9 years of being furniture had trained every cell of me to do, in the presence of a threat I could not fight. I made myself smaller. I dropped my eyes. And I began, already, quietly, the way I had begun 100 times before, to disappear. And Verity Castellane took off her grandmother's ring. She did it slowly, in the dead silence, in front of 300 people, turned the heavy gold signet off her smallest finger, the ring that no living soul had ever seen leave her hand, the seal that had pressed 2 centuries of this family's word into wax. And she set it down on the white tablecloth beside Coralie Aubrac's ribboned blade of a toast, deliberately. With a small final click everyone near enough heard, the way you set down a weapon you have just decided you are never going to need again. And the whole courtyard watched the Frost of Castellane take off the armor of her own name in public, and not one of them understood yet what they were seeing. And then she turned, not to the crowd, not to Coralie, not to the board she had spent her whole life trying to satisfy. She turned to me. And she crossed the small, careful space that the contract had kept between us for 4 months, and she lifted her bare hand, the hand that had worn the ring for 20 years, that looked naked and strange and young without it. And she set it against the side of my face. And she said, in a voice with every last degree of frost gone out of it, pitched to carry to the back of the courtyard, to the workers standing where the workers always stand. Coralie is right about one thing. So let me save her the trouble. I hired a cellar girl to play at love. I have been doing it for 4 months. But there is a thing Coralie does not know. A thing I have not let one living soul on this earth know, including the girl herself. Including, on most nights, including tonight until this exact moment, myself. I did not pick a stranger. I did not pick a convenient body. I picked the one person I have been in love with since I was 23 years old, and she sat in my grandmother's cellar the night she died and told me the truth when I begged her for it. The only true thing anyone has said to me in this whole house in my whole life. I wrote a contract because I am a coward, and a contract was the only door a coward could find to her. The only way I could have her near me without ever having to risk hearing her say no. I told her every single day that it was for the arrangement, because I could not have survived her being kind to me for money. And she looked at me, only at me, with 300 people, and the house of Aubrac and the whole grey jury of the board holding their breath. And she said the 4 words I had braced against every day for 4 months, turned exactly inside out, for the first time and the truest time. It was never the arrangement, Maren. It was, I need to be very clear, a catastrophe. The way I have told it makes it sound like a triumph. And in the moment, with her bare hand on my face and her grandmother's ring on the tablecloth, and my own scent telling the whole valley the truth at last, it felt like the only triumph I had ever had. But for many days after, it was very nearly the ruin of both of us. A bond made at a gala in front of the board does not save a domain. It enrages one. Coralie Aubrac had come up the hill to take Castellane by marriage and had instead been made a fool of in front of the entire valley. And the Aubracs do not absorb a public humiliation. They answer it, and the answer came within the week. And it came dressed the way ruin always comes in that valley, in the sober gray language of law and reason and concern for the common good. Because here is the unbearable thing, the thing that kept me awake on the 4th night after the gala and the 5th. Coralie was not wrong. There was a contract, there was a wage, a life-changing one, paid by a powerful alpha to a poor omega who needed the money to keep her disabled father in his bed. There was my signature on a paper agreeing to perform exactly this. And a bond that begins inside a paid arrangement is, in the cold, flat language of the charter and the courts, precisely the kind of thing the law was built to look at very hard and very skeptically. A rich woman, a desperate poor one. A signature a clever advocate could call the product of duress. The Aubracs filed to have the bond voided as a sham, and the merger reinstated. And the most painful part of it, the part I have had to make a long peace with, is that in some other version of this story, a version where Verity had not loved me, where she truly had bought a convenient body to dodge a marriage she found distasteful, Coralie Aubrac would have been the only person in that whole courtyard doing the right and decent thing. The law is not a fool for looking hard at an alpha with money who pays an omega without it to love her on cue. That alpha is real. The valley is full of her. The law exists because of her. The law is only a fool in this, that it cannot, from the outside, tell that alpha apart from the one who took off her grandmother's ring in front of 300 people, because she would sooner lose the oldest name in the valley than let anyone believe, for 1 minute longer, that what she felt for a cellar girl was a thing that could be bought. I want to tell you what that week was, because lawsuit is a clean word for a thing that was not clean at all. The valley does not wait for a court. The valley had handed down its own verdict by the next morning. In the markets and the tasting rooms and the long, long memories. And the verdict came in 2 versions. And both of them ended with me. Either the Castellane heir had lost her mind over a cellar girl, or the cellar girl had cold-bloodedly trapped the heir. And it did not matter which version a person believed, because both of them made me the thing that had broken the oldest house in the valley. I went back down to work, because I did not know what else a person does with her hands when her life is on fire. I drew the vintage and kept the ledgers because the wine does not care what the valley says about you. And I felt the crews I had worked beside for 9 years go quiet when I passed. Felt the women find somewhere else to look. and I understood that I had finally broken the one rule that had kept me alive my whole life. Be invisible, be no one, never once be the thing they talk about. And that there is no climbing back behind that rule once it is broken. The door only opens the one way. And my father heard. Of course he heard. The valley made very sure he heard, the way valleys always do, with a kindness on the front of it and a knife behind. And I went down to the cottage that evening, sick with dread, braced for his shame, ready to have ruined the good opinion of the one person I had built my entire careful life around keeping. And my father, who could no longer say my name in fewer than 2 tries, took my hand in his good hand and worked his ruined mouth for a long, long moment. And what he finally got out, with enormous effort, was 2 words, good. And I did not understand, that night, what he meant. I understood it later. He had known, the way Honora had known, the way Inez Rose had known, the way every single person who had ever loved me had known and been waiting 9 years for. That the girl who was a roof to everyone had been quietly, hopelessly in love the whole time, and had never once let herself reach. The only 2 people on the entire estate who had not known were Verity and me. I sat with my father in the cottage that night, while the valley tore my name to pieces up the hill, and he held my hand and would not let go. And for the first time in 8 years, I stopped being the parent and let myself be the child. And I wept, and he let me. And it turned out he had been waiting 8 years to be allowed to hold me while I did. The matter went, as the valley's great matters always went, to the one authority both houses still bowed to. The arbiter Verity Castellane had named in her own will for any dispute over the charter she had written. Old Inez Rose, who had been Honora's lawyer and her dearest friend for 60 years, who was 86 and blind in one eye and afraid of absolutely nothing left on this earth, and who had with her own hand decades ago drafted the very clause the whole war was now being fought over. Inez Rose came up to Castellane in a car older than I was. She read the Aubrac filing once and turned it face down on Honora's old desk, and then she did the thing that no one, not the board, not the Aubracs, not Verity's, expected. She said she would hear from the cellar girl, alone. I have heard quite enough over 60 years from people who own things, she said, to the whole assembled room. She received me in Honora's old study, in Honora's own chair, by the window that looked down the slope at the Rose. A tiny ancient woman, straight as a fence bourgeois, one eye gone milky, and the other clear and terrible. And she did not offer me anything to drink, and she did not soften one word of it. She said, "Child, I am far too old to be moved by a romantic scene at a gala, and I have watched alphas with money take whatever they liked from omegas without it for 60 years. And I will be in my grave before I let it happen, in a house that Verity Castellane built with her own ferocity. So I am going to ask you a single question, and you are going to give me the true answer, because I wrote the lie detecting clause in that charter myself, and I have been catching the liars of this valley since before your mother was a girl, and you will not be the one who finally manages it. Put aside the bond and the gala and the romance of it all, which does not interest me. Tell me only this. If Verity Castellane came to you tomorrow morning and told you she had been wrong, that for your sake and the domain's she would have the bond dissolved, which can be done in the first year. It is not pleasant, but it can be done. That she would pay you every centime the contract promised, and a great deal more. Besides, settle your father in comfort for the rest of his life, give you a glowing name and a free road to anywhere, and never trouble you again. And that you would walk out of here from this hour your own woman, owing nothing to anyone. Would that be the worst thing that had ever happened to you? I did not keep small. I did not, for the first time in 24 years, reach for the answer that would make the powerful person's decision easier to make. I thought about a gold ring coming off onto a desk in the dark. I thought about 4 months of it's for the arrangement, a wall rebuilt by hand 100 times around a thing that fought every hour to get out. I thought about a woman who had been built instead of loved, who would rather hold nothing real than something warm she could not be certain of, standing up in front of 300 people to gamble the only name she had on the chance that a cellar girl might love her back. And I told Inez Rose the truth, which was the worst and the best thing at once. It would be the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I would let her do it anyway, tomorrow morning, if she truly believed it would save her or the domain. Because for 4 months, she refused to take a single thing from me that I had not freely given, even after she had paid for the legal right to take all of it. And I will not be the reason that the one person who ever loved me enough to build a coward's contract, rather than risk my saying no, gets branded a fraud in her own grandmother's house. So hear me, since you wanted the true answer. I did not bond her for the money. The money was for my father, and I would have signed her paper for nothing. I bonded her because I have loved her since I was 15 years old and watched her walk through the cellar in the lamplight. And she has loved me since I was 19 and told her the truth in the dark. And we are both such thorough cowards that it took a public scandal and a lawsuit to drag it out of either of us. Void it if the law leaves you no choice. But you will not stand in Honora Castellane's study and let anyone in this valley tell me it was not real. Inez Rose looked at me with her one clear eye for a long, long moment, the kind of look that has read 60 years of liars and is reading you all the way to the floor of you. And then she rose, with the great slowness of very old bone, and crossed to the door and opened it. And Verity was in the corridor, not pacing, standing, the way she stood at the head of the long cellar. But I could see even from the chair that the standing still was costing her every single thing she had. And Inez Rose said, in the dry, tired voice of a woman who has settled 60 years of this valley's wars, and is weary unto death of all of them, the bond stands. Not because there was no contract, there was. Coralie is not wrong about the shape of the thing. And you, Verity Castellane, are going to spend a long while being grateful that your grandmother named me her arbiter, and not someone who cares more about being correct than about being right. She paused at the door, and her terrible old voice did something almost gentle. Honora left me one instruction about you that never went into the will, child. She made me swear it the week before she died. She said, when the wolves come for the domain, and they will come, they always come, do not watch the balance sheet. Watch which way the cellar girl jumps. If she runs, let the whole estate go. It was never worth keeping. But if she stays, give her everything, and tell her that I knew. And she gathered her old coat about her, and she said, to the room, to the corridor, to the 2 cowards she had just married for good, she stayed. Stop being afraid of each other. I have not told you about the night before Inez Rose came up the hill, and it is the night I think about more than any other, because it is the night the contract finally died, and the true thing was born, raw and shaking out of its ashes. After the gala, after the Aubrac filing, in the long gray days when it looked as though we had set fire to everything for nothing, the merger may be reinstated, the bond may be void, my name may be ruined in the valley for good, Verity came to find me. In the cellar, where else? We have only ever known how to tell each other the truth underground. And she did not have the ring on. And she did not say it's for the arrangement, because there was no arrangement left anywhere in the world to hide behind. The lie was over, burned down in front of 300 people. And all that was left standing in the ash was the unbearable true thing neither of us had ever been brave enough to say sober and in daylight. And she stood in front of me in the lamplight, the frost of Castellane with nothing left to hold carefully and nothing left to lose. And she said, I have loved you for 9 years, and I never once let you know it. And then when I finally found a way to be near you, I built a wall of money around it so high that I would never have to find out whether you could love me back. That is the worst thing I have ever done in my life, and I did it to the one person I love most in the world, and I do not deserve for any of it to be real. But it is real. On my side, it has always been real. Every cup of coffee and every dawn in the cellar, and every single time I said it was for the arrangement and lied. And I did the thing I had not let myself do in 9 years and 4 months. I crossed the small space that money and fear and a signed and witnessed contract had kept between us. And I picked up her grandmother's ring from where it lay on the cellar table. She had taken it off again, to be only Verity for me one more time. And I took her bare hand in both of mine, and I put the ring back onto her finger myself, slowly, the way she had taken it off in front of 300 people, except in reverse, except as a promise instead of a surrender, because she had spent 4 months taking that ring off to be a woman I could love, and I needed her to know, with her whole frightened heart, that she had it backward, that I loved the heir and the woman both, that I had loved every single version of Verity Castellane there had ever been, the frost and the fire and the coward and the brave one, from the back of every room she had ever walked through without seeing me. And I said the only thing left that needed saying. You wrote a contract because you were afraid I would say no. I signed it because I was afraid you would never, ever ask me for real. We have wasted 9 years being frightened of the exact same thing. I am finished being frightened of it tonight. It is real on my side too. It has been real since you walked through this cellar when I was 15, and it has had your name on it since the night your grandmother died. So put the ring back on and keep it on, and stop deciding things about my heart without asking me. I have had a whole lifetime of people deciding what I am strong enough to carry. You are going to ask me, every time, like a free woman, for the rest of our lives, starting right now in this cellar, where we have only ever told each other the truth. And Verity Castellane, who had not asked a living soul for a single thing since she was 11 years old, and the road took her parents, asked me. And I said yes. Not of course. Not the small, useful, frightened yes that 9 years and a hard life had trained into my mouth, but a free woman's yes in the dark, with the ring on her hand and the contract dead on the floor, and nothing left standing between us anymore but the truth. And that was the night before Inez rose, and it remains the only wholly free thing I have ever chosen in my life. And I would not undo 1 single second of the 9 cowardly years it took the two of us to be brave enough to say it out loud. It is a year now since the Harvest Gala. The domain survived, not through the Aubrac merger, which Inez Rose's ruling killed for good, but the hard and honest way, the way Honora herself had always wanted to and never quite dared. We sold the far western blocks that had never grown anything but debt and bad memories, and we made a smaller, truer, more honest house out of what was left. And Verity stopped trying to hold 200 years so carefully that none of it ever spilled, and started, instead, letting me carry the weight of it beside her, which is a different thing entirely, which is the very thing her grandmother had been trying to teach her in the cellar all those years. The thing Honora confessed to me at the end was the one regret of her 50 years, that she had taught the child to hold the name alone, instead of teaching her that she was allowed to share it. Coralie Aubrac did not get Castellane. What she got instead was the lasting legend of the valley, the story, told now at every harvest, of the night she stood up under the gold lights to call a love a fraud and watch the frost of Castellane take her own grandmother's ring off her hand to prove her wrong in front of 300 people. There is no merger on this earth worth what that single story cost the House of Aubrac, and I confess to you that I enjoy it more than is strictly good for my soul. My father lived to see it. He had the ramp and the nurse and the 3 afternoons a week, and he had in the end the one thing I had long ago stopped letting myself believe I could ever give him. A daughter who was not only a roof over his head, who had a life of her own that he could see her standing up inside of, who brought a tall, quiet alpha down to the cottage to taste his terrible homemade wine from his one allowed row, and who watched that alpha drink every drop of the worst wine in the valley and gravely ask for more, because it made the old man's ruined face do the thing it had not done in years. He died in the spring, at home, in his own bed, with his own view of the rose he had given his back to. And Verity sat up with me the whole long night after, with her grandmother's ring off on my bedside table. And she let me be the one who fell apart for once in my life. And she held me. And she did not tell me to hold still. And I understood somewhere in that gray morning, the other half of the thing I had been learning all along, that the roof gets to come inside out of the rain now, that there is finally a warm room I am allowed to stand all the way up inside of, and that she is in it. The ring lives on the table on my side of the bed now most nights. She still wears it by day. She is still the heir. She will always be the heir. And I would not have her be 1 ounce less than the whole of what she is. But at night, it comes off, and I have learned at last, at 25, what it means when the gold catches the lamplight on its way to the table beside me. It means the holding carefully is done for the day. It means the wall is down for good. It means it was never the arrangement, which is the thing she said to 300 people, and the thing she says to me still, in the dark, with no one watching and nothing to prove, when she does not have to say anything to me at all. I signed a contract to pretend to be engaged to the woman I had loved in silence for 9 years, and it was the worst and the best thing that ever happened to me. And I would not strike a single clause of it from the record, because the lie turned out to be the only door 2 such thorough cowards could ever have found their way to the truth through. And waiting on the other side of it was a woman who would rather lose the oldest name in the valley than let anyone alive believe, for 1 minute more, that what she felt for a cellar girl was a thing with a price on it. Her name is Verity Castellane. My name is Maren. The bond is real. It was always real. The contract is ash on a cellar floor, and the ring is on the table beside me. And neither of us, not for 1 hour of 1 day since the gala, is pretending anymore. If you stayed to the end of this one, thank you. These stories take a long time to tell the right way, and you gave me an hour, and I know exactly what an hour is worth. If you want the parts I could not tell you here, the cellar at night, the things said with the ring off, the uncensored version of how 2 cowards finally stopped being afraid, it is on the Patreon link in the description. Tell us where you are watching from, and subscribe, so the next quiet woman's story finds its way to you. And if you have spent your whole life being someone's roof, useful, necessary, loved for what you carry, and never once asked what you wanted underneath it, let this be the one thing you take from me tonight. The people who are worth it will ask. Make them ask. And then, for once in your careful life, give yourself permission to say the free woman's yes.